Hello, government students. Today we're going to be doing Notes 5.2, the electoral process. Your essential question: how do representatives get elected in the United States? So in the US, the election process occurs in two steps. We have the nomination first, which we narrow the field of candidates from quite a few down to just one single candidate on both sides. Then we have the general election, where voters make the final choice of who they want to hold that office. We really whittle it down to one candidate to run in the general election for each party. There are different types of primary elections. Primary elections are how we choose between all of these candidates down to one candidate in the general election. In California, we had our primary election this year in March 3rd. You might remember, right before all the COVID shutdowns happened. And we have an open primary. So in California, as long as you're registered to vote, you can participate in the primary. Now, different political parties will have different exclusions. So if you are registered as a Democrat, you obviously vote in the Democratic primary. If you're registered a Republican, you vote in the Republican primary. But if you are not registered for a specific party, if you decide that you don't want to be a part of a political party, you may be limited on the choice of which ballots you can choose from. Right now in 2020, we had the Democratic ballot be open to anyone. So if you were not part of a political party and you requested a Democratic ballot, you could have one, but the Republican primary was not open. But different states have their primaries in different ways. Primary elections are the way that the nominee becomes the candidate for their party to run for office. This first occurred around 1900 to bring more democracy, to give us more choices in who ultimately our candidates would be in the highest offices across the nation. The nominee that has the most delegates does become the candidate for their party, and the candidacy is made official at the party's national convention. So this year it looked a little different because those conventions were mostly online. They were through Zoom and things like that, but usually they're big celebrations that happen at the end of summer. So this map sort of shows you here the different primaries in different states. Some are open, some are closed. And these are the dates that we had the primary elections. So primaries started as early as February and went all the way until June this year. California used to have their primary way back in June, but they actually moved it up this year. We moved it up to March. It was the earliest we've ever had it, and that was to make us more competitive in the primary election. Usually the election's kind of decided by the time it gets to us, but this putting us up earlier really gave us a fair shot in determining who the Democratic and Republican nominees would be. Candidates must gather a number of required voters' signatures to get on the ballot. So this is called a petition. This is for candidates to get on the ballot and for propositions to get on the ballot. So we're going to be learning in a couple weeks about all the propositions that are currently on the ballot, the laws that Californians get to vote on that potentially could become new laws in the state, but they have to have a certain number of signatures to get on the ballot in the first place. When we have elections for Congress, it's the same time every single, or every other year, I guess I should say. Congress has chosen the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of every even numbered year for congressional elections. Okay, so I'll repeat that one more time. The first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So for this year, the first Tuesday after the first Monday happens to be November 3rd. So that's an even numbered year because we're in 2020. So that means that our new elected officials will take office in January of 2021. So a precinct is a voting district. Those are areas in which you go and you participate in the political process. You go to your polling place. So in West Sacramento, if we're looking at the city of West Sacramento, it's divided into a few different precincts. The one for River City High School, their polling place is actually at our high school. In case you haven't noticed, on election day, we actually have a polling place right at the gym, right outside of our high school. And this is where voters go who live in that precinct. So anyone who lives around River City High School, they would go to the high school on that day to vote, unless they're voting absentee, in which case they can drop off their ballot there, or they can go there if they choose not to vote absentee. The voting used to be done orally. People used to gather together, and this was when only white men who owned property could vote. They would go and they would voice their vote. It was considered manly to speak out their vote. But we started using paper ballots in about the mid 1800s, and this gave us more privacy and gave us the secret ballot. So this is how different ballots look. Our ballots generally look like this on the left side. So in California, we do an office group ballot. So we'll have the first thing on the ballot this year, 2020, we'll have the president and vice president of the United States. And you'll have all of these boxes where you can choose from all of the candidates. And then it will go down in order. So we'll have the Senate, the House of Representatives, it'll go on like that. Some states do party column ballots. So instead, they have you choose by political party specifically, and then you can vote that way. When you go to vote at your polling place, there will be voting machines there. So electronic voting counting has been used since the 1960s. Some states still use punch card ballots. In the state of California, we get a pen and we get to bubble in on our ballots, kind of like those old bubble tests that you had to do maybe in elementary school. We do that when we vote now. So they'll give you either a felt pen or they'll give you a blue or black ink pen, and you'll fill in your ballot, and then you'll take it over here to these machines and you'll put it in here, and you can see the number right at the corner. It'll have the count of how many ballots have been deposited in that machine per day. And then they can go ahead and they can scan it through a machine, or they can do a hand count to determine the winners of the election. So money and elections. Campaign spending has gone up and up and up every year dramatically since 2000. Sources of funding for political campaigns. We have small contributors, people who are individually contributing to campaigns. A lot of rich people contribute to campaigns as well. Candidates will fund themselves. For instance, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in 2016, both of them were pretty wealthy, so they were able to fund a lot of their own campaign. And then we'll have fundraising organizations that'll raise money specifically for different candidates. We have regulation of campaign financing. The Federal Election Committee, the FEC, was set up in 1974 to administer all federal laws dealing with campaign financing. So the FEC enforces timely disclosure of all campaign finance information. So they have to tell you who's donating, where they're getting their money from, how much they're spending, what they're spending their money on, because there's limits on what you can spend your money on. So there's limits on how much people can contribute to an election. There's limits on how campaigns can actually spend their money. So to make sure that they're receiving money and spending it specifically on the campaign, not spending it on other things. That would be a break in the rules. And we had a case, Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976. This was a case over your First Amendment rights, so your freedom of expression. So ultimately, this case decided that in politics, money is speech. So you should be able to spend as much money as you want on an election, because if they limit how much money you spend, they are limiting your freedom of speech. But although we do have limits on how much a person can give individually to a campaign, we do have things that are loopholes in all of these laws. So, like soft money, party organizations can do party building activities, and they can raise money for the party rather than raise money for the candidate, and therefore they can get around this law. They can have independent spending, so people can spend as much as they want. Like, for instance, right now, Mike Bloomberg, he was running for the Democratic nomination. He did not win the primary election, and now he's spending a lot of money in Florida campaigning for Joe Biden. And while he's not donating that money directly to Joe Biden, he's spending it within the campaign he's spending it outside of the campaign privately so that he is not limited on how much money he can spend. So issue ads, criticize, or support different candidates without mentioning their name specifically, but you can know who they're talking about. And there was a Supreme Court case in 2010 regarding this called Citizens United. This was a court case that was about corporate funding of political broadcasts, and they said that that cannot be limited under the First Amendment because the First Amendment gives us free speech, and that limits the free speech of corporations. So President Obama was not a fan of this Supreme Court decision. We have foreign corporations now, so corporations that are outside of the United States are able to spend as much money as they want without any limitation in our elections. So President Obama said that I don't think American elections should be bankrolled by America's most powerful interests, or worst, by foreign entities. All right, so the mass media and public opinion. Public opinion is the attitudes that are held by people on matters about the government and politics. The public affairs are any events or issues that concern the public at large. Public opinions can exist at the same time. People can either support or oppose different things that are out in the public. And everyone falls somewhere along this political spectrum. Yesterday, we did that quiz provided by the Pew Research Institute, and we were able to determine where we fall on this spectrum politically. So, the furthest left would be the most radical, favoring extreme change. So, people that want to do things like abolish systems that we have right now. So, some people are calling for abolishing ICE or abolishing the police. That would be a more radical left idea. Over on the right, it would be the other way. So this is really protecting our constitutional rights. So people reactionary on the right, a lot of very conservative people want to protect things like your Second Amendment right. So protect your right to bear arms, make sure that you have your right to free religion and then no one can infringe upon that, things like that. And then moderate people fall somewhere in the middle. So many factors influence our political opinions. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. Your family, of course, is the first thing that influences your political opinions. You first see the world through your family's eyes. Your families raise you, they give you a strong sense of who you are and what your family stands for. So that very much guides your political beliefs. Schools also provide you some political knowledge. Right now, you're learning about government and you are getting political knowledge when we talk about current events every day. But you're also taught very early on. So you learn to be patriotic, you learn about great Americans, you learn the national anthem, you say all of the I can't even remember the name right now. But you say all of those things at the beginning of the school day when you're in elementary school. You learn to honor the flag, you celebrate the holidays, all of those things. Schools definitely teach you about patriotism from when you are very, very early on in your educational career. The mass media obviously influences you as well. Some of you have talked about TikTok in this class and how it can influence people. It is a communication system that can reach millions of people every single day. It's a widely dispersed audience. People can see it around the world. And that's just one example. Of course, we know all sort of media now can be consumed around the world simultaneously. Your peers also influence you. So your friends, your classmates, neighbors, coworkers, people that you associate yourself with. Opinion leaders. So these are anyone that has any sort of strong influence on you. So this could be your friends, this could be teachers, this could be faith leaders, this could be social media celebrities that you follow, any sort of person that could sway your opinion. And then historical events as well, so major impacts on public opinion. For people of my generation, 9/11 probably had a big historical impact on people. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement may be having a large impact on people your age because this is a major historical event that's happening that shapes public opinion. How do we measure public opinion? So, of course, candidates can win elections and we can determine public opinion based on that. Whoever gets the majority of the votes, that would be an easy way to determine where the society stands. So, we also can determine if our candidates carry out their campaign promises. So, if they promise to do something when they're running for office and then they don't follow suit with that once they get elected, it can make it harder for them to get reelected in the future. Interest groups also work to shape public policy. Some interest groups are groups like the California Teachers Association. That's a union. It's a union of teachers across the whole state of California, and they work to shape public policy. So right now they're pushing for a Proposition 15. That's something that they support. We also have nurses, the Nurses Association. They're promoting Proposition believe it's 22 or 23, the one on dialysis right now. So we have different organizations that really work to shape public policy. You'll see some other commercials on TV, on YouTube. The media is frequently described as mirrors or molders of opinion, so they can either reflect back on how society is, or they can show society in the way that can kind of mold people's opinion. And then, of course, public officials would rely on their contacts, their constituents, people they represent. They answer phone calls, they read their mail, they meet people in public and get their information. Generally, polls are what we use to gather public opinion. So straw votes are to ask people, a large amount of people, the same question, and to pull back information. Sometimes these are unreliable though, because we used polls in 2016 and almost every single poll out there showed Hillary Clinton beating Donald Trump. And it turns out that although she did get 3 million more votes than he did, she did not actually win the election. So just because you have more support doesn't mean you're necessarily going to win the election. What they really need to do is be determining the Electoral College, who is polling in certain states that they need to win in order to determine who the winner of the election might be. So this kind of shows you the polling process. So you have to define who you're going to poll, you have to get a sample, prepare your questions, interview, and then report out your data. Overall, polls are fairly reliable to determine people's interest in different political figures. Polls and pollsters sometimes ask questions that shape opinions that they're supposed to measure. Public opinion is the major, but by no means the only influence on public policy. So our elected officials do look at polls all the time. They determine how they're doing in polls, but they also use other means to determine public opinion. They actually go out and they talk to people, they gather data. It's not just about the polls. So much of the American political system is designed to protect minority interest against the excesses of majority views and actions. So we have majority rights, but remember we have majority rule, but we have to protect minority rights as well. So the mass media. Mass media transmits information. So we have many different forms of mass media in the United States. Depending on your age, you consume very different forms of mass media. Our older generations still get their mass media from things like newspapers and the radio, whereas our younger generations may get things from like Twitter or TikTok or television. Maybe magazines, if anyone's still reading magazines. But it really depends on your age where you're getting your media from. The media play a large role in shaping the public agenda, the societal problems that they decide to focus on, and what they think we need government attention for can be shaped by the media. So, unless we had the media explaining the situations happening and reporting on them with the unjust treatment to African Americans in this country, it would be a lot harder to get that information out there. So, it was really important that the media played a big impact on that this year. If they didn't report on George Floyd, who knows if that movement would have got as strong as it did. So they can also tell people what to think about, not necessarily what to think, although some media forms do tell people directly what to think, but they're really just giving them options of what things they should be thinking about. So today, television allows candidates to appeal directly to the people. Any of you who watched the debate earlier this week were able to see that. So we did have them bickering back and forth, but frequently they would turn to the cameras and talk directly to the American people to try to drown out the other person. Media coverage can be used to their advantage, so our political figures will use different forms of media. Um, each one of the candidates has an Instagram, they have a Facebook, they have a Snapchat, they have a TikTok, they have all of it. They're trying to get whoever they can to vote for them. And usually they'll try to get some sort of sound bites. Our reporting, especially now with things like TikTok, have very short sound bites that can air in just a few seconds. That way we can cut it down and report it out to people very quickly. But only a small part of the public actually understands much of what the media has to say about public affairs. So mostly people just skim the news, they read headlines. Not very many people go into in depth coverage of political events, but the information is out there. You all are living in the biggest information age of the world, really. The biggest information age that the world has ever seen. You have everything at your fingertips, but we actually have to go seek it out. And that's what we have to do. And it's not just young people, older generations as well. We all have to go seek it out if we want the truth. It's out there. So, everyone, don't forget to write a summary at the end of your notes. 5.2.